Have you ever wondered why some people live completely disconnected from reality? Or perhaps you know someone who seems to have difficulty facing the most basic situations in life. Have you noticed moments in yourself when you prefer to escape to a world of fantasy instead of dealing with real problems that are right in front of you? What I'm going to share with you in the next few minutes could completely transform your understanding of how our mind works from childhood, and how this understanding can free you from mental patterns that may be sabotaging your ability to face life effectively. Stay with me until the end, because this might be the key to helping you or someone you love find a healthier balance between imagination and reality. The phenomenon we're exploring today has been studied for over 100 years and is known in psychology as the differentiation between directive thinking and fantasy thinking. This fundamental concept was deeply explored by Dr. Carl Gustav Jung in his studies on human psychological development, and was later expanded by various researchers such as Dr. Jean Piaget and Dr. Anna Freud. In fact, this theme is as old as humanity itself. Since the times of Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, there have been records of debates about the nature of reality versus illusion. What has changed in the last 150 years was our ability to understand how these processes naturally develop in the human mind from the earliest childhood. Dr. William James in 1890 was one of the first to formulate theories about how a child gradually learns to distinguish between their internal desires and the outside world. He carefully observed how babies from 6 months to 2 years interacted with their environment, noting that initially they did not make a clear distinction between themselves and the world around them. Let's understand how this process works. Imagine a 3-year-old child who ardently wishes to have a pony. When their parents explain that it's not possible to have such a large animal in an apartment, the child finds an immediate solution through fantasy. She transforms her rocking horse into a living, pulsing steed in her mind, galloping through imaginary mountains and endless prairies without any need to adjust her desires to reality. If this same child doesn't even have a rocking horse, she will simply tie a piece of string to a chair and, with the same intensity of joy and satisfaction, ride her fierce imaginary steed. For the child, at that moment, the pleasure obtained is almost as real as it would be with a real pony. Keep watching, because we're about to explore what happens when this pattern of thinking doesn't properly evolve with a person's growth. Dr. Peter Wolff conducted a series of documented observations over 25 years, following children from the age of 2 until adulthood. He meticulously recorded how the transition from fantasy thinking to directive thinking occurred in different individuals. His studies began at 8 o'clock in the morning on April 17, 1964, when he began observing a group of 27 children in a controlled environment. Initially, all children demonstrated high levels of fantasy thinking, being unable to clearly distinguish between their desires and reality. At 3 years old, 82% of them believed they could fly if they wished hard enough, and 95% regularly conversed with imaginary friends. As the children grew, Wolff observed significant changes. At 5 years old, only 36% maintained conversations with imaginary friends, and less than 10% believed in the possibility of flying. At 7 in the evening on June 12, 1974, 10 years after the beginning of the study, Wolff recorded that the children, now 12-year-old adolescents, demonstrated a much greater capacity for directive thinking, with only 2 of the original participants maintaining high levels of fantasy thinking. The most fascinating was observing how those 2 individuals who maintained high patterns of fantasy thinking faced significant difficulties in school and in social relationships. One of them, young Michael James Peterson, consistently presented below-average grades and had few friends, frequently confusing social situations by reacting based on distorted perceptions of reality. If you've made it this far, pay close attention now. What Wolff discovered was that excessive fantasy thinking is not just a harmless phase of childhood, but can become a serious obstacle to the development of functional and well-adjusted adults if not properly moderated and directed. Dr. Elizabeth Chen Fraser, psychiatrist and researcher at the University of Toronto, documented more than 200 cases of adults who never properly developed the capacity for directive thinking. In her words, what we see are not just people with fertile imagination, but individuals who literally cannot face reality when it presents itself in an unpleasant or challenging way. These patients automatically resort to fantasies and denial as primary coping mechanisms, even when it deeply harms them. A particularly illustrative case was that of Katherine Louise Bennett, a 47-year-old woman who lost 3 consecutive jobs for failing to handle deadlines and practical responsibilities. Katherine spent approximately 6 hours a day in an elaborate fantasy world where she was a famous international writer, receiving awards and acclaim. Meanwhile, in her real life, she could barely write a page per week, constantly procrastinating and avoiding the concrete work necessary to achieve her supposed dream. After participating in an intensive cognitive behavioral therapy program for 28 weeks, Katherine learned specific techniques to develop directive thinking. The result was impressive. In less than 8 months, she completed her first real manuscript and, most importantly, began to establish a consistent routine of writing 3 hours daily, producing approximately 5 pages per day. But how exactly can we develop this healthy balance between directive and fantasy thinking? Dr. Henderson developed a protocol that has shown remarkable results in more than 800 patients over 12 years. First, it's essential to practice mindfulness daily for at least 15 minutes, focusing exclusively on the present moment and real physical sensations. This practice helps anchor the mind in concrete reality. Second, develop the habit of making small daily lists of concrete and achievable tasks. Start with just 3 items per day, ensuring they are specific and measurable. Third, practice what Dr. Henderson calls reality checking. For each significant thought you have during the day, ask the question, is this based on concrete evidence or on my desires and fears? Fourth, establish medium-term goals that are challenging but realistic, breaking them down into weekly steps. Finally, set aside specific time for creative imagination, 20 minutes daily, where you can deliberately explore fantasies and ideas without limits, but with the clear awareness that you are engaging in a temporary exercise of imagination. This protocol has demonstrated particularly impressive effectiveness for people struggling with anxiety, depression, or difficulties in concentration. The documented improvement rate after 12 weeks of consistent practice is approximately 78%. It's important to note that directive thinking doesn't mean completely abandoning imagination or creativity. In fact, many of history's greatest scientists and inventors possessed an extraordinary ability to alternate between directive thinking, focused on real problems, and imaginative flights that allowed them to visualize innovative solutions. Dr. Albert Einstein often spoke about his thought experiments, where he imagined impossible situations, like riding a ray of light, and then applied rigorous directive thinking to analyze the mathematical and physical implications of these fantasies. The crucial difference is that Einstein knew how to clearly distinguish between his creative mental exercises and concrete reality. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you could maintain this perfect balance between creative imagination and practical thinking focused on results? How your relationships, career, and emotional well-being could flourish if you fully develop this capacity. This balance is not suitable for everyone in all situations. People with certain neurological conditions, such as autism spectrum disorder or schizophrenia, may require personalized approaches by specialized professionals. Additionally, during periods of extreme emotional stress or trauma, it may be appropriate to temporarily allow more space for fantasy thinking as a coping mechanism. It's essential to consult a qualified clinical psychologist or psychiatrist if you notice that you have extreme difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality, or if you notice this pattern in someone close to you. Professionals such as cognitive behavioral psychotherapists or developmental psychologists are especially recommended for this type of issue. Remember that even the most powerful techniques for developing directive thinking can be counterproductive if applied rigidly or without consideration for the person's emotional well-being. The goal is not to eliminate imagination, but to integrate it in a healthy way with an accurate perception of reality. To use these techniques safely, start gradually and observe how you feel. If you notice increased anxiety or other negative symptoms, take a step back and seek professional guidance. To conclude our exploration of this fascinating territory between fantasy and reality, I would like to leave you with a reflection. Our human mind is incredibly adaptable, capable both of dreaming the impossible and methodically building the possible. True wisdom is not in choosing between these two modes of thought, but in knowing when each of them best serves our highest purposes. As philosopher Dr. William Barrett wrote, "The mark of maturity is not the elimination of fantasy, but the ability to clearly distinguish it from reality, allowing each to enrich the other rather than replace it." What we have discovered through modern psychology is that we are rediscovering an ancient wisdom. The path to a full life is not in escaping reality through fantasy, nor in completely repressing our ability to imagine, but in finding the delicate balance between these two powerful forces of the human mind. Do you know someone who could benefit from this information? Share this video with them. In the comments section below, tell me, have you noticed moments in your life where excessive fantasy thinking may have created obstacles for you? Or perhaps you've discovered your own techniques for developing directive thinking that you'd like to share with our community. If you appreciated this exploration of the human mind, subscribe to the channel for more content that helps understand the fascinating mechanisms behind our behaviors and apply this knowledge for a more full and conscious life. In the next video, we'll explore how thinking patterns established in childhood continue to influence our adult decisions, often without us realizing it. Remember, the power of your mind is determined not only by what you choose to imagine, but also by what you choose to transform into reality. Until next time.